hacks and MPs have been running around like headless chickens trying to actually predict whether or not James Cleverly would make it to the final. Well, actually, it wasn't whether or not James Cleverly would make it. It was they almost cemented that in. They said that was a dead cert almost, that James Cleverly was going to get through, and that it was a toss-up between the right of the party being represented either by Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick. And they were running around like headless chickens, it has to be said, and trying to actually get this right. Now, you have to remember that yesterday, Robert Jenrick, I think it was 10 fewer votes than he actually got today. So he's had, that's a pretty good going. And it wasn't expected. And James Cleverly has had this to say as his send-off.
We didn't do it. I didn't make it through. And that is massively disappointing for me. But one of the things that has really lifted my spirits is how many people have given me and the team so much support. So I want to say a huge thank you to you all. Could not have done any of this without you. Makes me proud to be a Conservative. Makes me proud that we can pull together as a team. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And then Robert Jenrick, after that, was first out of the traps on the press, and he spoke to GB News, and he had this to say.
Final two.
Thank you very much, Chris.
You'll be facing members. You'll be there at the event next Thursday, debating with Kemi Badenoch to be the future leader on GB News. You'll be debating with her to be the next leader of the party. How does it feel?
I'm absolutely delighted to have got the trust and the confidence of so many parliamentary colleagues. And I think that they have respected, resonated the message that I have been delivering for weeks now over the course of this campaign trail, that the country needs to change and the party has to change as well. And I have a very specific plan as to how we do that, whether it's improving the NHS, getting growth going again in our economy, or yes, securing our borders. I don't believe in platitudes. I want us to have a serious plan now as to how we move forward and get this party back into gear for the good of our country.
You're written off the...
All right, so he then goes on to say that actually it's a choice between leave and remain, and he says he's the only candidate willing to actually leave the ECHR. And then I thought that I would just remind viewers that Rob Jenrick in 2016 backed Theresa May, and before that he campaigned for David Cameron and therefore to remain in the European Union. So he has done quite the transformation, you could say. Tonight, Matthew, I will be a right-wing Brexiteer. It's that sort of, and the smoke float. Chloe won't get that reference. She's far too young. But, tonight, Matthew, I will be a Brexiteer. There was a show on television, Chloe, called Stars in the Rise. And they used to dress up as pop stars and then sing their songs and, come out transformed as said pop star. So, as I put it, Rob Jenrick is transformed as a right-wing Brexiteer that wants us to leave the ECHR and to hell with all of it. But Kemi Badenoch is not of that view, or at least she doesn't think that leaving the ECHR is a panacea. She thinks that actually there are other things that you could do. There are other ways in which you could do it. And she's pretty relaxed or ambivalent about our exit from it. Now, I would just gently make the point that actually she may well have a point, because other European nations that are in the EU and, of course, in the ECHR, they ignore ECHR rulings, right? They just say, to hell with that, I'm not going to do that. When the Chagos Islands came up, first of all, we, as a United Kingdom, when the Tories were in government, before James Cleverly opened negotiations, there was a UN court, an international court resolution that said that the Chagos Islands, we were there illegally and we ought to get out and start negotiations and all the rest of it. Well, guess what we did? We ignored it. When there is the political will, you can ignore meddlesome international courts that, to be perfectly frank, the British people don't care about. I hear so often we need to have a seat at the table. Well, actually, I'm pretty over the damn table. And if the table ain't serving British interests, then maybe it's time to leave the table. That would be the Rob Jenrick argument. But maybe you can just ignore the table. So I think that she has a fair argument, but then people say, well, you know, she actually said in 2018 that she was happy that the Tories had scrapped visa measures and that actually people would be able to come here more willingly, and look what that led to. But back then, we were told that we would have a Australian-style points-based system where actually there would be fewer people here coming here, and it would be a hell of a lot more competitive and difficult to come here unless you had the skills that Britain needs. Well, that clearly hasn't manifested itself to be what kind of system we all envisaged it would be. So to be fair to Kemi Badenoch, we all thought that we supported the immigration system post-Brexit because it was a very different beast to the one that we ultimately ended up with. Do you see what I mean? I'm trying to play devil's advocate here and see the points of view of both sides. But Charlie, how would you sum it up, the two positions there? And then we'll get to some comments from some of our viewers who are split either way.
Well, I think you're right. And it all stems from Brexit, which was the idea of taking back control of your money, your borders, which is obviously the key thing that we're talking about here, and your laws. And I think when it comes to the laws, it seemed to me that I think it was France and Italy that were the two top rule breakers that were sitting around the EU table that sort of flounced the rules when things didn't work for them. And there is the argument that we should have been more stronger. We were, a net contributor to the EU. We were a senior partner in the EU. We should have done more to say, well, hang on, it's our way or the highway. We shouldn't be pegged back by others.
It's a very polite way of saying F off.
Yes. But when it comes to, immigration, I think what Kemi's saying is that, look, and Boris, to be fair, actually got this earlier this week when he's released his new book called Unleashed. That, under the Australian points-based system, I think it was a year or two after Brexit, and certainly after the pandemic, where immigration sort of skyrocketed because we needed people to do an awful lot of jobs that just weren't being done. But the whole point of an Australian points-based system, immigration system, is to be able to pick and choose who you want to come into the country, and you can limit the numbers. Now, that limiting the numbers hasn't happened. And what Kemi is saying is that, look, you can talk about just walking out the ECHR. That's fine. It might be part of the solution. But she's coming at this campaign, and what you'll hear probably from her over the next month is about first principles. And it's always going back to the first principles. And her first principle is reducing migration, net migration, legal immigration, and migration in total. So she will be saying to members, Conservative Party members, that's the aim. How we achieve that, you've got to have a plan, and it might involve leaving the ECHR. It isn't just walking out of anything or saying, I'm going to leave this, I'm going to leave that, or we're going to put a cap here, cap there, whatever. She wants to come up with an actual plan to deal with what everybody wants to see, which is reducing those numbers. Now, Rob's obviously taken a different approach to appeal to Tory Party members by saying, actually, he thinks the plan is, or part of the plan and the solution is to just leave the ECHR. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know whether that is something that should or shouldn't happen. I mean, I am probably a bit soft and would rather be round the table just to have be part of the conversation. But ultimately, whether you're in the ECHR or not, if there's going to be a judicial review about your migration system, well, let's just have the review afterwards. But don't stop the United Kingdom, an independent sovereign state that voted Brexit to take back control of its money, borders and laws. Don't stop us doing what it is that we think we want to do, what the government thinks it should do in the interests of the British people. That's simply not right.
And to me, the Brexit prospectus was one that said that no longer could business have this free lunch of cheap migrant labour from parts of the world. Obviously, it was primarily the EU member states before we left. But that's just continued, right? We haven't actually weaned business off that and said that you need to invest in the British people that you are purportedly here to serve and you're making money from. So you need to represent the values of us. That was what I deemed Brexit to be about. And I think it's safe to say that I played a little part in campaigning for it. But the point is, Chloe, that getting around the table, being around the table, I can understand the frustration, and I feel it myself, when just the other day we had the news that an Albanian who was deported for burglary in our returns agreement with Albania, he was deported, I should say, to Albania. And whilst in Albania, he said, I know what I'll do. So he gets himself back over to little old Blighty in breach of his returns agreement. And he arrives back here. He gets a lass pregnant here in Britain. She pops out a sprog. And so he clearly had been here some time before he was found out to have been in the country. And he is able to claim, I think it was Article 12 maybe, actually, of the ECHR to say right to family life. I have a right to family life, despite the fact that I'm a convicted criminal here in Britain. I betrayed the trust and faith in the immigration system for me to come and contribute here, and I broke the law and I stole from the British public, a member of the British public. And I'm back, and I'm going to claim ECHR right to a family life. And terrorists have used this as well in the past to stop deportations. You can see the frustration with this. We're sick of the international fuckery, frankly, and we just want to actually get back to being able to be a functioning nation state. Is that too much to ask?
No, I don't think it is. And that story about the Albanian who we cannot deport because of the ECHR, I think, as someone who's very torn in this leadership campaign as to whether I'll be supporting Jenrick or Badenoch, that definitely made me tip more towards Robert Jenrick, because I thought we have got to get out of the ECHR. We cannot be held to ransom by these people anymore. And I think you're right that having a seat at the table does not necessarily give us more power. It just gives us less power, if anything. I mean, I can't remember the name of, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I think it's a BBC documentary series from the sort of 2010 to 2015 David Cameron days of him at the EU negotiating with the EU before he decided to call the referendum. And I mean, they treated him like absolute dog shit. They were horrible to him. They wouldn't compromise with him on anything. I mean, I was shocked after watching that David Cameron was actually pro-Remain. I'm like, they treated you like that and didn't care about
tells you everything you need
Britain
to know
at all, yet you still voted led the campaign for Remain. I mean, I was absolutely gobsmacked. So, and I think that it is very, very frustrating for British voters who voted for Brexit, which, sure, we don't know exactly what flavour you're going to get, but take back control was the main message, right? We would have control of our borders, and we just have not seen that at all. Now, whether Robert Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch are going to be better at delivering that, I think it's hard to say. Robert Jenrick obviously voted Remain, but he seems to appear in his campaign messaging to be more like a Brexiteer these days. People do change. I mean, I personally was undecided at the time of the referendum. It took me about a year to kind of decide properly. So, I'm understanding of that. But we've also had politicians who, in the 2017 general election, or when they were campaigning, said, yep, I voted Remain, but this is what the people said, and we're just going to get 100% behind it. We're going to make a success of Brexit. And then as soon as they were in, sort of come, that 2019 time when Parliament, they were all trying to stop Brexit, turned out it was all a lie. So it's hard to know how much to trust Robert Jenrick when he sounds like he's a Brexiteer.
I remember, the most egregious example of that for me was when Anna Soubry had said, Soupy Soubs, she had said that we need to have an EU referendum. And then we got one, and the result went the way she didn't want. And suddenly, she threw, I was going to say she threw the bottle at it, but you know what I mean. And so Eunice, on that point of ignoring democratic outcomes, on the point of Robert Jenrick, he was a Remainer. Now he's had this Damascene conversion, and he saw the light, and he's now a Farage-East backer of Brexit. And then you've got Kemi Badenoch who did back Brexit, by the way. I remember being sat in her office in shortly after the referendum, maybe 2017, and talking about Brexit and how she had voted to leave. And this was when she was in the London Assembly. And I got the sense of a principled woman who believed passionately in Brexit and saw this country from a unique vantage point as someone who was born here but brought up in a different country in Nigeria. So she had a unique vantage point that I've always respected when it comes to her, where she said, why is the United Kingdom doing this to itself? So I quite like that idea, but some people don't, and they're saying, I'm going with Jenrick. Where are you on this? Do you think that actually you can marry both things? Or do you see Badenoch as weak, despite the fact she was Brexiteer, and Jenrick as strong, despite the fact he was a Remainer?
So I think one of the problems with the whole Brexit thing was that it was done by Remainers. It was done by Theresa May, which was a Remainer. And that's why we could never get a proper deal done. We didn't have someone like Nigel Farage that didn't care, said, okay, I can cut all ties and I can do my own thing. We had people that were almost on the fence with the whole thing, and they were, bargaining with the European Union and giving them points when they didn't have to. Even Trump said, he was like, why are you paying the European Union? You don't have to pay them anymore. And Theresa May had to pay like billions to the European Union just to leave them. And I found that ridiculous. So I think the whole process was hindered by incompetent individuals, or just individuals that didn't believe in the whole process. In terms of the Conservatives and the leadership party, I'm actually quite disappointed that Cleverly, is knocked out, because I think he was the best option out of it. Yeah, I rather like him, because I saw his speech the other day, and I think it was the UN or EU, where he was talking about David Lammy, and he was saying how he just plays identity politics all the time just to get where he wants. And I think he's quite well spoken. He's a black man, but he doesn't pander to the identity politics. And that's one of the reasons I really like him, because he just tries to get jobs done. In terms of Jenrick and Badenoch, I would rather go for Jenrick. And that's exactly for what he said about ECHQ. Because I think it's just getting ridiculous now. The whole point of Brexit was that we come out of the European Union so we can decide. We become a global country instead of a European country. We can make deals with America if we want to, or we can make deals with whoever. And we pick and choose who comes to the country. But unfortunately, after Brexit happened, we had less people coming from Europe, but then more people coming from all other parts of the world, like third world countries, coming here either illegally or legally, and then using ECHR to stay. One of the reasons I think the European Union didn't work is because it got too big too fast. If it was like 5 or 6 or 7 countries, the main countries in Europe, like England, France, Spain, Germany, it could have worked. But then when you start adding Romania and Bulgaria, no one is going to go and live in Romania and Bulgaria, even though it's beautiful. But in terms of just economic opportunity, everyone from those countries is going to travel to the West. No one's going to really travel to the East. And I think that was one of the problems with the European Union. And the problem now is that once we left that union, now we have people coming from third world countries, from Somalia or wherever they come from. They just jump on the dinghy, or they just come through other means. Once they get here, they stay here. And then because of ECHR, we can't kick them out. So I think the whole thing has actually backfired.
Have you got what it takes to be a reasoned presenter? Well, send us a short clip of yourself to join@reasoned.uk, and we might be seeing you on this very channel very soon indeed.